So I was kind of just perusing YouTube for a little bit and checking some of the recommended sections, and I was looking at some of the videos coming across my feed, and I noticed something a little interesting. Most of the titles and most of the videos coming out, at least on my feed, were what's the best portrait camera of 2025? Which kind of got me thinking, what would be the best portrait camera in 2025? Or heck, even beyond? Well, we're going to find out. Now, when I saw that title, I kind of thought there's a few ways we can go with anything portrait. So I broke it down into three different categories, and the three categories I find most important, or three things that I think a portrait camera should be able to handle. The first one is natural light portraiture. One thing I will mention before talking about cameras is knowing lighting and how to use lighting to your advantage. That's number one when it comes to portraiture. Lighting is going to basically sculpt a face or allow you to see your subject in darker lit situations or even give you the desired result. Your camera is just going to capture the light, and your lighting situation is much more important. The other thing that's much more important is the lens. The lens is probably the most important thing because it will determine how the subject looks in the frame. Right now I'm using a 50mm lens, which basically gives you a little bit of a flattering image compared to the 20mm that I normally use. The 20mm will make my face wider. This one here narrows it down a little bit more, and then as you go further and further and further, it will narrow the face even more, and sometimes it'll even flatten it out at the other end, but in a more flattering way than, let's say, a wide angle would. Now, if you get really up close to a wide angle, it can make features a little bit more skinny, or it can also blow it up and make it much larger than it actually is in the frame. So learn your lighting and learn your lenses before delving into a camera for portraiture. But one thing natural light photography has taught me, and I'm doing this over years, is that the lighting can change at any moment. The sun can go behind cloud cover. Next thing you know, you don't have the same kind of lighting you were shooting with before. Or you could be shooting on a cloudy day and now all of a sudden have to find some shade because the lighting is too strong or too direct onto your subject. So you have to have a camera that has a little bit of dynamic range, or at least more dynamic range than anything else. You have to remember, shooting sometimes can give you all of these moments where you just don't know what's going on. So you have to understand all the different situations and learn to adapt. And a camera that has a wider dynamic range will allow you to adapt a little bit easier to the situations, even if you forgot to adjust your settings a little bit. So I would say looking for something with a wider dynamic range should be okay, and most modern cameras today have such dynamic range. The second type of photography that I would want to mention is studio portraiture. With studio portraiture, it's not so much something that you need to really stress for in terms of dynamic range. What you're going to want is something that can basically take the colors and smooth them out a little bit more, or work well with lighting. Something that you can put a wireless trigger on and be able to use the hot shoe to trigger your flashes, or you're going to want something that basically allows you to shoot at whatever shutter speed you need to be able to freeze the action if you need really like high speed shooting. Most cases you don't need high speed shooting. So I would kind of rule that one out for most portrait photographers. Now, the subject doesn't change very much. Everyone's usually pretty still, and everything is pretty controlled in a studio environment, so I don't foresee anyone really having any issues. Just know, though, that you can use practically any camera for this. But we'll kind of go into what I think is a good camera at the end of the video. And the third option for portrait photographers is basically a hybrid of the two. This is where your wedding photographers kind of fall in. Some wedding photographers are just lighting, some wedding photographers are just natural light, but most of them are both. They use lighting in certain situations, and then they use natural light in other situations. As a wedding photographer myself, I use both. I use flash when I need to use flash, and I use natural light when it's available. And it's available for most of the day, so I don't end up using flash until usually at night or indoors. And the biggest thing for me was always balancing the white balance. So when you're using flash, you have to take into account what kind of light you are shooting with. You can use gels to be able to match the lighting in the room, or you can custom white balance it so that you get close enough in camera with the flash, but the other lights in the room are going to still be a little bit off, just not as off. You could also use the flash to overpower the lights in the room, so that is another thing that you can do, but we'll get into using flash in later videos. So with wedding photography, I prefer something with a little bit wider of a dynamic range, just to be able to pull up the shadows and tone down the highlights a little bit if I needed to. So the camera that I would pick, and really it's going to be more specs than anything. You can honestly use any camera you want to. I'm filming this on a Nikon Z5. I've used that for weddings. I use a Nikon D700 for weddings. I've used the D800E. People use the Canon 5D all the way through the different series. They've used Sony cameras. All sorts of different cameras fit this criteria. So any camera you can buy today, as long as it's from, I would say, 2008, 2009 and on, you can pretty much get away with. But I'll give you a little bit of specs to kind of shoot for, and it doesn't mean you have to stick to it. For me, generally a camera should have around 24 megapixels. It's just the sweet spot nowadays. And the reason why is you have enough detail to crop in if you need to, and most cameras with 24 megapixels also come with around 14 stops of dynamic range. The 14 stops of dynamic range allows you to be able to bring up the shadows a little bit, bring down the highlights a little bit, and give you a good gradation of colors, which I think you need, especially to capture skin tones properly. There's not a lot of reds and whites in skin tone. There's a big hue and a big range. It goes from peach to all sorts of yellows and oranges and reds and pinks and all sorts of other colors within it. So it's good to have a camera that can capture the wide range of colors that's in somebody's skin tone. And then on top of that, there's other skin tones, like you have some browns, and even in there, like there's a lot of oranges and there's a lot of yellows in those skin tones as well. So you need to know your camera can capture all of that, so when you go into post, you can get the appropriate skin tone for the person. The other is 2 command dials. So the dials which allow you to switch on the back and switch on the front, all of your settings, you need to have 2 of those. And most cameras today have 2. Some of them are one's on the back, one's on the top. Some are one's on the back, one's on the front. Nikon, it's all one on the back, one on the front. I've seen Canon do one on the back, one on top. I've seen Sony do different things as well. So that's very important. Just 2 dials. You can choose your shutter speed and your aperture width, and then you can select ISO and whatever else with that as well. And that's just for an ease of use and ergonomics thing, because if you can't choose your settings appropriately, then you basically have a camera that's not going to allow you to switch very quickly either. And then an interchangeable lens system. So a camera that has more than one lens that you could attach to it. And the reason for that is creativity. So you can use a wide angle lens, or you can use a 50 millimeter, or you could even go in with an 85. Or heck, you can do a 200 millimeter for portraits. All of that's very important, and I think a portrait camera should allow you to use multiple lenses so that you can choose what kind of portrait you're going to be taking. And in a studio setting, this is important as well because you also need to take into account how much room you have in the studio or even at a wedding. You need to know if you have to use a 35 because you're in a tight space. So, being able to choose your lenses is just as important as being able to choose your camera. And that's basically the guidelines. For me, the perfect portrait camera is the camera I'm filming on right now, which is the Nikon Z5. It has 24 megapixels. The dial's also on the front and the back. And really, it gives me the dynamic range that I need. So I don't need to go to anything else. And some of my most favorite portraits have been shot on this camera. I'm not recommending it for everybody, and I'm not saying it is the perfect camera, but really, you don't have to go any further than the Z5. You also can go all the way back to the D700 with Nikon or even the Canon 5D Classic. Those are great cameras for portraiture and will still remain great cameras until people demand more megapixels for their shots. And even then, I don't think you're going to have much of a problem as they give you amazing colors, amazing skin tones, and will continue to do that until those cameras die. So that's just my opinion on it, and hopefully it helps. This is a little bit of a rant on this, but that's all right.